Alright, so this next little phase of this project will be to install this carburetor. The kit comes with an air filter, comes with a breather hose, an adapter for the fuel line or the throttle line, some fittings, and a gasket and some studs for mounting it. A couple of other little things, but we'll go over that. So should just be kind of plug and go. There are some considerations in that you have some vacuum lines. Obviously the breather line is going to go up into the air cleaner. So there's a couple of little adjustments and adaptations that we'll need to make. So let's go ahead and get started and get on with this project. All right, so first thing that I want to kind of review where we're at on this. In the previous video, we set the carburetor in place and kind of looked at the routing of all of our cables and wires, and discovered that we need to move the throttle cable from the left side to the right side of the oil cooler, which is kind of right in this area right here. So if you haven't already done so, I'll put a link up top to so you can see that video about how to move your throttle cable from its original position, which was right here, over to this position right here. This will get it out of the way. It'll make it more accessible for the throttle. You won't have to worry about any kind of linkage or anything. The next thing is, all the wires and whatnot. The carburetor is going to consume this area right in here, and you don't want a bunch of wires in where it's going. There's this green wire right here is for the charging system, and this is the main positive that goes to the battery off of the charging post for the alternator. So you want that kind of stashed and out of the way. The rest of the wires all need to go down below and go underneath the alternator right here, and just make sure you have good routing for that. So we haven't really connected any of those. We see that we've already done some pre-work. I've got a new fuel line. This is actually much longer than it needs to be, but on the fuel injected, the fuel line stopped right here where there was a tee-off, and it had that fuel bar that went across, but we don't have that now. So this fuel line eventually is going to go to the carburetor, like right here. So this is nice and long, and we can cut it to size once we get the carburetor in place. But that's been pre-installed, and it goes back to the fuel line that's connected back in the back of the engine back there. So under the car. The other thing is you've got some vacuum lines. These are your vacuum advanced lines. You got them on the front and the back. This is, we'll go over that in a little while, but we got these, they're kind of pre-positioned and ready to go. And so that's it. That's the next step here is to go ahead and put the carburetor in place. Now this kit comes with a gasket and studs and nuts for the studs, but it also comes with what looks like a couple of spare jets. I say these are spare because I looked and inspected, and it looks like they're already installed. So we're going to call these spares. I hope that's the case. So anyway, let's go ahead and get these studs installed and lay the carburetor into its mount. All right, so there you go. Got the studs in place. The small threads go in to into the carburetor, and the longer threads are extending so that you can get them through the flange, and then we'll have the nut on there. So that's how those studs go on. So while I have it out here and we can actually move it around, let's take a quick tour of this carburetor. So one of the things you'll notice on here is this big old nodule. This is an electric choke. We'll have to supply electric power right here, and that will be off of the ignition circuit, not dedicated electric, but only when the ignition is on. We'll connect that to the ignition circuit that connects to the coil, so that's on when it turns on. This choke is adjustable with these 3 screws, and you can turn this back and forth like this, so that you can get the choke. This is the choke plate right here, to be closed when it's cold, right? So when the engine is cold, you want the throttle to be higher, and that's when the choke is closed, is when it's cold. So you want the throttle to be a little higher, and that's what this little stepping linkage is here. So when the choke is cold, the throttle linkage is this right here is the idle the idle screw. And so the idle screw sits on this little cam. So when the choke is closed, you can see how it adjusts the throttle so that the idle will be lower when it's warm and idle will be higher when it's cold. So that's kind of how that works. So once this electric choke closes and it's in an open state like this, then you can see the throttle goes all the way down to 0, and your idle is just the throttle plate, which is down here. And you can see how the throttle plate adjusts. See that? Here's the throttle plate right there. This little hole right there, that is the idle mixture hole. That's the very smallest hole that is the last thing that opens up when the car is idling. So that's how the electric choke works and how it integrates with the throttle. So down here there's a couple of other little neat things. Right here is the accelerator pump. So when you hit the throttle really quick, see how that works? This mechanism has a pump in it that will squirt fuel directly into the intake manifold, just raw fuel, so that you can get a quick burst of power. Here's one of those jets that I was saying we have extra ones of right there. Here are the primary low side and high side of the vacuum ports. This is above the throttle, this is below the throttle, and those will go in above and below the distributor vacuum advance. So these two pipes are going to go on these two holes right here eventually. So that is here's the bowl. On the fuel injected 79, which is what this car was originally fuel injected, the fuel pressure was controlled by a fuel pressure regulator. The fuel pressure on a carburetor is controlled by the bowl. There's a little float in here that when it gets full of fuel, it closes off, and then the new fuel pump that we're going to put in, once it can no longer provide pressure, it turns itself off. So this is how that system works. This is where your main fuel line will go in. So that's the carburetor. Let's go ahead and get this thing in place, and then we can start working on the linkage. The one in the back is kind of hard to get to. I don't know if you can see, it almost doesn't clear. What I ended up having to do is I took a wrench and I ground it down. You see, I made it thinner on one side, and I reduced the height of the wall so that I could get it in there in order to tighten it up. So, I mean, if you've been doing this for a while, you probably adjusted a couple of wrenches from time to time. I know my old 1/2 inch that I used for adjusting distributors on Chevys is kind of an interesting tool as well. So anyway, that back one back there might pose a little bit of a challenge for you, but just make sure you get a good 20 foot-pounds or something on there, and get that nice and tight so you can get a good seal on that gasket. All right, moving on. All right, so I'm making some progress here. Before I get too far ahead, I want to walk you through some of the things that I've gone through. So first off, the kit comes with a throttle cable extender. If you put that on there, it makes it a little bit longer, and it gives you a nice solid tip that you can thread through to this piece. See, it's just a little screw that holds that on. The trick about this little gap right here is you can see I've actually squashed it together a little bit, because you want to keep it so that the shaft stays in. And if it's too wide, that shaft will come off of one side, and then it will ride on these threads right here, and it just won't be as smooth as you want it to be. I mean, you don't want this to be impaired whatsoever. Nice and loose, but still, properly aligned. So if you squeeze this just a little bit closer, it'll make these two a little bit thinner, and this little barrel won't become able to come off of those grooves. So anyway, that's the throttle linkage. It comes under here, comes out from where you realigned it. I've gone up to the front of the car and ensured that I've given it all of the throttle back that I could, because you know when you start janking with it, you get a lot of slack in the line. But everything looks good. There's a lot of places where you can adjust this. I don't think that this connector is really that adjustable. You kind of put it in and it extends it. That's what it does. But from here, you can allow that to come further forward if you need. I don't think I have any slack. Really, that's much to account for. But you know, obviously, you don't want to override. You don't want to override the idle. So if your throttle is, you know, too tight, then your throttle, your idle switch, see it kind of hovering right there. So you don't want that to, you don't want to override your idle settings by the tightness of your throttle cable. So you just have to fiddle fart with it a bit and get it so that it's just nice and smooth moving and is not impairing anything. So on the next thing here, so you see I've installed my fuel line. I opted to run my fuel line up over the top to keep it away from, you know, anything that's going to get hot or any of the wires that are going to be kind of routed down in this area. So I routed it over the top of the coil. I don't think the coil is going to get hot. I'm going to keep an eye on that. If I need to, I'll just change the routing on that. But that's just my initial thinking, is just to separate it from all the other things that are going on down here. So it comes around. I might actually end up making a grommet for that entry point right there, just to make sure no vibrations will wear through the line. But just some considerations. The other thing is, you know, you got the breather line comes from here, goes up to here. They give you a bunch of breather line in the kit. The breather line, it shouldn't be a big honking thing. It just needs to be able to get in there without binding or pinching. And any fumes from the crankcase need to be able to be vented into the intake above, but inside the filter. So this little hole right here goes inside the filter, so it's not going to get your filter all wet with oil or anything. And then it'll give your carburetor the opportunity to burn that off. The next thing I'm working on here is, yeah. So this little, I mean, it's just a pipe clamp, right? Well, if you put the pipe clamp on this side, pointing that direction, it's going to interfere with this choke linkage. It's kind of a really tight. So I flipped it over and I put it on here. Initially, I was going to try to hide it back here, but there's too much going on back there once you get the breather in. So this is the default location, I think. Probably the best, least out of the way location for this pipe clamp to hold this air cleaner in place. Also, the orientation of the air cleaner, there's only one orientation. I mean, literally like a 5-degree variance in where you can put this, because it's off center, but it's going to go into this little groove right in here. So it's kind of a no-brainer there. But when you get ready to put this on, be prepared to put this in a different location. The default that they distributed it in was not the place that they were going to have it right here, and that would have interfered with this. So I put it up here in the front. So the next thing we're going to work on here is a little bit of wiring. We're going to put a wire from the electric choke and connect that wire to the starter. I'm sorry, this is the idle solenoid, and then that will go to the positive terminal on the coil. So I'm going to do a little bit of wiring, and then we'll cut back in the video and I'll show you how we got that set up. All right, so there you go. I've got my my wire from the electric choke connected to the wire for my idle solenoid, and that is connected to the positive post on my coil, which will get power during ignition. The last part of the carburetor installation is to manage the vacuum hoses. This is the primary vacuum hose that goes on the back of the vacuum advance on the distributor. But this distributor has a vacuum on the front side of that diaphragm as well. This is for the fuel injection system, and that would allow you to manage the amount of vacuum that is pulled, not necessarily from the ported side of the carburetor. So typically you would just connect this side and leave that side hanging, but we're going to play around with that, and I'm going to make a separate video on that. But typically this right here, if you have a standard distributor with only one port, your vacuum would go to the ported side, which would be either this one or this one. They're in the same place, right at the venturi. So that is pretty much it. We're going to close the video on that today. This is the installation of the carburetor on the 1979 Super Beetle fuel injection to carburetor conversion. So be sure to subscribe and watch the channel, because the next test we're going to be installing the new fuel filter, and we'll see if we can get this thing fired off. So check back and look for that next video as it comes down the pipe. That's all I got for today. Cheers.